Hello, everybody. Welcome to my webinar. I'm really sorry, and I apologize that this is starting later than advertised. I just gave the entire presentation, and apparently it didn't go anywhere, and so I'm going to do it all again. Anything worth doing is worth doing twice, as the saying maybe goes. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, my name is Seth Scott. I'm the founder of Shepherd's Wallet, and I specialize exclusively in pastoral finances and taxation. And so today we're going to be talking specifically about retirement readiness for pastors. And we're going to break this down into two paths, which essentially came down to one decision that takes this already niche and unique world that pastors are in with their finances, and it creates two sub niches. And it's basically those that are still in the Social Security system and those that have opted out. And so we're going to give you unique frameworks to follow, unique action steps depending on which road that you're on when it comes to retirement. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. At any point in this presentation, if you have questions, feel welcome to put it into chat. We'll address those at the end, and happy to address any of those. And again, thank you for your patience. Let's get into it. I want to start with a framework from the scriptures, from the words of Christ. For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost? This is from Luke 14, verse 28. And this says to me that faithful stewardship requires preparation. And the earlier you start, the easier it is. That's the good news. So if you're on this webinar and you're watching this after the fact, and you're a minister in your 20s or in your 30s, God bless you for taking this seriously and for thinking about this now. Your path is going to be so much easier than those that are approaching retirement and are perhaps, having to play a little bit of catch up. We do have steps that those pastors can also take, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the earlier you start, the easier this road is going to be for you. And then finally, this hour is about understanding the tools that exist nowhere else in the tax code, only for you. And there's some really exciting things that I'm looking forward to talking about, things that I'm trying not to break the 10th commandment on, not to covet, because I wish that I could do it, but I'm not a minister, and so I don't. But if you are a minister, you can. So this isn't all doom and gloom. This isn't all you should be saving 100% of your paycheck into retirement. There are some legitimately exciting things that we can talk about and that you can access as a minister that I think is going to get some of you pretty excited. All right, so here's our agenda for the day. There's three basic parts. The first two parts are breaking down these two paths that you could be on towards retirement and what it could look like for you. So, part one, we're talking about the default path for pastors that pay their own self-employment tax. So I'm calling this the SECA path. SECA stands for the Self-Employment Contributions Act. And so your tax situation, this is what does your reality look like as a minister paying self-employment taxes? I'm going to give you a financial framework. It's a real easy to remember, easy to implement system that's going to get you 70 to 80% of the way towards building financial resilience for retirement and beyond. And then I'm going to give you two action steps that you can implement today to start moving in that direction. Then we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about pastors who have opted out of Social Security. What's different? How does your path look different from the SECA path? Same. We're going to give you a financial framework. It's different because you're on a different path, but the structure is similar, easy to remember. And same thing, we're going to give you two action steps that you, as an opted out minister, can take to build your resilience and your preparedness for retirement. Then we're going to have a section at the end where we're going to talk about those that are currently at this fork in the road, where you haven't made this decision yet. You're early in your ministry career and you're wondering, should I? Should I opt out or not? This is probably the most common question I get from young ministers in particular, but even established ministers who are mentoring younger persons who are coming into the ministry and who are asking this question. So first of all, we're going to go over the eligibility requirements. Are you even eligible to opt out at this point? And then if you are, I'm going to give you a 4-question framework to follow. And if you can answer yes to all of those questions, and only then would I consider opting out to be the choice for you. All right. And we're also going to have some bonus content for parsonage pastors in particular. So if you're a parsonage pastor and you're concerned that you're not building equity in a home while you're working, I have content and I have a framework specifically for you. And this applies whether you're on the SECA path or whether you're on the opted out path. This is special just for parsonage pastors who have a retirement blind spot in that you're behind the eight ball when it comes to building wealth in home equity during your working years. And so we'll talk about that. All right. So if you are an established minister, if you're at least 2 years into ministry, you've already made a decision on which path you're on, whether you remember it or not, but it's shaped your entire financial life. So the reality is that at ordination, licensing, or commissioning, within 2 years of receiving your first ministerial income, a window of opportunity opened to you. And whether you walked through that window or not, that choice changed how you're taxed, how you saved, and how you'll retire. Completely different one way or the other. So today what we're going to do is we're going to identify what path you're on. We're going to understand the reality of the path that you're on, and we're going to build you a custom-built playbook around how to navigate that path. All right, who's excited? I'm excited. Let's talk about these two paths in general before we jump into the details. So the first path is you're still in Social Security. I'm going to call this the SECA path. You're paying self-employment tax on all your ministerial income, and that is 15.3% on every dollar that you make. That's both wages and housing allowance. And if you're in a parsonage, that includes the fair rental value of the parsonage that the church is providing to you. You pay 15.3% on all of that. And what that means is for you, that tax is usually not withheld automatically for you. For most employees, they just fill out a W-4 and they're done with it. And their taxes are withheld automatically. There's no surprise bill in April. But for you, you're going to have to do a little bit of extra planning. We'll talk you through that. Your 403b-9, your church retirement plan, if you're paying self-employment tax as a minister, this is hands down your most powerful planning tool. It does multiple things simultaneously. It lets you keep your money instead of giving it to the government in taxes. It's beautiful. I love it. You're going to get excited about it too when we talk about it. And you are building benefits towards Social Security and Medicare eligibility. Now, if you're on the other path and you're considering it and you've opted out of Social Security, the good news is that you get to keep that 15.3% in self-employment tax. You don't have to pay that. You're exempt. However, the bad news is that you're giving up four distinct benefits that we will talk about in detail later. You're not paying Social Security. You're not getting Social Security in retirement. You're not getting SSDI, which is disability insurance benefits. You're not building up towards Medicare eligibility, which is huge. A lot of pastors don't realize that. And you're giving up spousal and survivor benefits. We'll talk about all of these. Every retirement dollar has to be self-funded. You have essentially said to the government, no, thank you. I don't need your social safety net. I'm going to build my own. You have to build your own. And we'll talk about how to do that. So that comes in the form of higher savings targets and more complexity for life. Neither path is easy, but each one has a playbook, and we're going to talk to you about that exactly today. Excuse me. All right, let's talk about pastors who are still in the system. If you're paying self-employment tax as a minister, your taxes are higher than you think they ought to be. And I agree with you. But your 403b-9 is more powerful than perhaps you can appreciate. So let's talk about your tax situation first. What's different from you and a secular employee? What's actually happening? Why are you paying so much in taxes? It's not your fault. It's just the way that it is. So let's compare you to a secular regular employee. So if you look at like someone who just works at the bank, for instance, or someone who works construction, you have some similarities with that person, but you also have some very, very big differences. For the regular employee, this is what their situation looks like. They're paying into Social Security and Medicare, but they get to split that liability with their employer. So instead of putting the whole 15.3% up themselves, they pay half. The employee pays 7.65% in FICA taxes, and then the employer matches that 7.65% in payroll taxes, and that's how you get that 15.3. And It's often automatically withheld. Again, you get a job, they give you a W-4, you fill it out, they start withholding federal and state taxes for you, and you generally can just forget about it until taxes come around. And you often don't have any surprise bills in April. Sometimes you even get a little bit of a refund back if you don't have a complicated situation. Now, you as a minister, you are taxed as if you're self-employed. So yes, you are an employee, you get a W-4, but you're also self-employed. So tell me how that makes sense. But dems the brakes. So you are on the hook to pay the full 15.3% yourself because technically you are both your employee and your employer. I thought the church was your employer. That's a whole rabbit hole that we're not going to go down, but this is just the reality of your situation. So this is on all income, like I said, and this includes your housing allowance. It includes your parsonage benefit, the fair rental value. So hate to break it to you, but your housing allowance benefit is not a tax-free benefit. If you're still in the system, you're paying self-employment tax on all of that. It may be an income tax exclusion. Sorry, it may be an income tax exclusion, but you're still paying that 15.3 cents on every dollar that you're making either in cash housing allowance or in the fair rental value benefit that you're receiving as a parsonage. And usually taxes are not withheld automatically for you. You have to make extra steps in order to make sure that your withholdings are in line. So what this means, and this is an unfortunate reality, at modest incomes, your dual tax status as a minister often means that you end up paying more in total taxes than secular employees, even with a housing allowance. And even though that may be bad news to some pastors, I don't think there's a lot of pastors that are in the system that are necessarily surprised, just because it really feels like you're paying a lot in taxes, and you are. But there are ways to mitigate it, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about your church retirement plan. And hey, look, here we go. We're talking about your church retirement plan. So, your most powerful tool is a 403b9. It's a lot of fancy letters and parentheses and stuff, but essentially what this is, in the IRS code, this is called a church retirement plan. And so this is a retirement plan that your church sets up and that you can participate in. And this is what makes it powerful. There's really two benefits. The first benefit is right now, it helps you save majorly in taxes. Your pre-tax contributions reduce not only your income tax base, but they also reduce your self-employment tax base. Let me compare this to a secular employee for a moment. So a secular employee working at a bank, for instance, the bank has a 401k. That's their version of a retirement plan that the employer sponsors for them. They have to pay their FICA tax first, that 7.65%. They pay that, and then they get an income tax deduction on anything they put in pre-tax to their 401k. You get the same income tax benefit that the banker gets putting into his 401k, but you get to deduct on top of that your Social Security and Medicare taxes. It's amazing. So not only are you getting an income tax benefit for federal and state, if you're in a state that pays income taxes, but you're also getting a self-employment tax benefit for every dollar you put in. So that's 15 cents on the dollar for every dollar you put in, plus your federal tax rate, plus your state tax rate. You're saving more in taxes putting into a church 403b9 than a secular employee is putting into an IRA or a 401k or whatever they have available to them. So yeah, 401k does not do this, and you can look at IRS publication 517 if you'd like to go to the horse's mouth on that. The second benefit is a long-range benefit, and this is the ability to take tax-free income in retirement. Well, Seth, that sounds like a Roth. Yeah, this is better than a Roth. So it's like you get the benefit of a Roth account of taking it out tax-free, but you get to take that with pre-tax dollars. It's amazing. So distributions from a 403b9 can be designated as housing allowance in retirement. Right, so your housing allowance doesn't necessarily expire when you stop working. You can keep taking a housing allowance in retirement for as long as you live, provided that your church has the right kind of retirement plan. So this is income tax-free permanently. And of course, you're not paying self-employment tax on 403b distributions because that's not earned income. So you get a quadruple tax benefit. You get an income tax deduction for putting it in pre-tax, just like everybody else. But on top of that, you get a self-employment tax deduction. It grows tax deferred. So as long as it sits in there, it's invested in whatever you want to invest it in. Hopefully it's growing at a pretty good clip. And all of that growth is tax deferred. You're not paying a cent on any of that. And then when you take it out, you can take it out as a housing allowance and not pay taxes on the back end either. You can see why I'm trying not to break the 10th commandment, not to covet. I wish I could do this kind of account, but only ministers can do it, and only ministers whose churches have a 403b9. So yeah, this is similar to a Roth IRA in that it buys you tax-free income in retirement, but you can do that with pre-tax dollars, and you can look at that source there again for more direct information on that. All right, this is my favorite slide in the whole presentation. And I know I'm a nerd. I love charts. I love spreadsheets, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to walk you through what we're looking at here. So what we're going to look at is what your account balance for different kind of retirement accounts can look like. So these are the assumptions going in. You see that line down the middle. To the left, this is pre-retirement. This is called the accumulation phase. So this is because 25 years on this graph. So we're assuming that for 25 years while you're working, you're putting in $6,000 a year. You can see the assumptions along the bottom. We're assuming you're putting in $6,000 a year pre-tax. And we're assuming that that is growing at a 7% growth rate before you retire. You're putting it in stocks or index funds or bonds or whatever it is that you want. You're getting a 7% growth, which is reasonable. That's not too aggressive. Once you retire, again, after 25 years in this situation, you stop putting money in and instead you start taking money out. You start taking out $20,000 a year as housing allowance if you can until the money runs out. And so that's what we're modeling today. I'm going to start with a traditional account. So this is like a traditional 403b with your church, for instance. And this is what a typical, accumulation distribution curve would look like for any kind of retirement account. You're putting in, it's not going up in a straight line, it's going up exponentially because the money you're putting in is making more money, which is making more money. Again, over time, none of this is investment advice, but ideally you would see a curve looking like that if you're investing it wisely. So you've put in, $6,000 over 25 years is $150,000. You've put in $150,000 over the course of your 25-year career, and it looks like by the time you retire, it's worth about $375,000. Pretty good, pretty good. And then once you retire, you start taking money out. Now you're taking money out of your nest egg, and you're taking it out $20,000 a year. We're just going to keep it real simple. And but it's a traditional 403b, and there's no provision in this example that allows you to take it tax-free as a housing allowance. So what does that mean? Because it's a pre-tax account, you're paying income taxes on every dollar as it comes out. And so it doesn't last as long, right? So it falls down, and it looks like by the time we're 10, 20, 30, 33 years after retirement, the money runs out. Still not bad, not a bad situation. And this is what a traditional curve looks like. How would this compare to a Roth curve? Now, for those that don't know, a Roth account flips traditional on its head. And the traditional, you put it in pre-tax, you get a tax deduction for dollars you put in, but then you have to pay taxes on every money that comes out. Every dollar that comes out, you have to pay income tax on it. That's a pre-tax account. A Roth account flips that around. You get no tax benefit for putting it in. That means you have to pay taxes first, and then the rest goes in. But you get tax-free growth and income on the back end. So you get to take it out tax-free, no questions asked. It's great. So we will expect the accumulation phase to be a little lower than the traditional because you have tax drag. You're paying taxes first, and you can't afford to put as much in. And so this is what it looks like. So it grows at a lower rate because you're paying taxes as you go. And it's kind of hard to see in this graph, but it is true that it is lasting longer than it would be if you were paying taxes. Because once you hit retirement and you take that $20,000 out, you're taking it out tax-free because you pay the taxes on it already. And so now, if you look at a traditional accumulation distribution graph that compares Roth and traditional, you will probably see a convergence when it comes down to zero in retirement. And this looks like it's really spread out. And the reason for that is because the difference for you as a minister between traditional and Roth is even bigger because not only are you paying income tax for Roth, you're also paying self-employment tax for Roth. And so that gap is way big for you. This is why I generally don't recommend that pastors who are in Social Security contribute to a Roth account. There are a few examples or a few exceptions, and we'll talk about that. But that hit that you take in paying self-employment tax is just too much to make Roth contributions worth it. Now, we'll talk about this too, but you can do pre-tax to get the SECA deduction, and then if your plan allows, you can convert to Roth later. You only pay income tax when you do that, so you can still get the SECA tax benefit. But anyway, that's getting into the nerdy weeds again. So that explains why there's such a big gap here. Roth, if you're opted into Social Security, contributing to Roth is more expensive than perhaps you realize. So that's how that goes. But we haven't even gotten to the good part yet. The good part is looking at a 403b9 with housing allowance in retirement. So if your church has a 403b9, they can designate distributions as housing allowance in retirement. So we expect the 403b9 will follow the same curve going in as the pre-tax account, right? Because you're getting the same tax benefits going in, but we expect it to last longer in retirement because you're not paying taxes at all. And in fact, in this situation, it lasts much longer. You can see that it goes way out there. And again, these are real numbers. The assumptions are there at the bottom. You can run this yourself if you're savvy with spreadsheets and whatnot. But yeah, and I did the math. Again, you put in $150,000 total in this scenario. In the 403b9 with housing allowance, you've pulled out nearly $1 million by the time you get to the end of it. And it lasts for what, 10, 20, 30, 40, like 48, 40, 45 years, something like that. Incredible, right? So you don't pay a dime in taxes in this whole scenario if you're using a 403b9 with housing allowance. So if you have this, use it, use it, use it. All right, now let's talk about your financial framework as a SECA paying pastor. You're opted in to Social Security, and what is your basic path towards financial resilience as an opted in pastor? I'm going to give you a 5, 10, 15 rule. Easy to remember, easy numbers, and if you follow this and implement it, you're 70 to 80% of the way towards holistic financial resilience, including for retirement. And so this is what it looks like. Here's the 5, 10, 15 rule. The 5 stands for 5 months of expenses in your emergency fund. We focus on this first. Once this is funded, then you move on to the other stuff. And the reason why I pick 5, if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, for instance, he recommends 3 to 6. 3 to 6 months is your emergency fund, and we're within that. We're within that framework. We're within 3 to 6, but I start with 5 for pastors. We won't get into a lot of detail, but it's basically because pastors don't have as much employment protection as secular employees do. Um, for one thing, churches have a lot of protections under the First Amendment to essentially hire and fire ministers at will, and so the courts have turned away wrongful termination suits and things that pastors have brought, citing specifically these exemptions that churches have. So, as a pastor, I mean, depending on how your church is structured, you could be one board meeting away from being jobless. And that's just the way of it. And you really don't have a lot of legal recourse that's going to protect you in that case. So that's one. The second thing is that churches are generally exempt from paying into unemployment tax, meaning that even if your church did fire you, you couldn't take unemployment while you search for another job. It's all on you. And so pastors are particularly vulnerable when it comes to their employment situation. And I think that easily justifies 5 months of expenses in your emergency fund to float you in case the worst happens. And it also doubles as an emergency fund. So if your car breaks down or whatnot, you have plenty of cash reserves to help deal with that. The 10 stands for 10 times your annual income in term life insurance coverage. Again, this is pretty standard for most people. You'll see 10 times your income, even in generic financial advice. Some say 8 to 10. I think 10 is justified for pastors because when you pass, you lose your housing allowance benefit for your family. And so having a little bit extra in life insurance coverage is going to help fill that gap. And then the 15 is for 15% savings rate in minimum retirement deferral. So you're going to be saving at least 15% of your paycheck into retirement. If your church matches or contributes for you, that's great. I'm talking about your elective deferrals. We should be aiming for 15%. And again, if you have a 403B and you're opted in, you should be doing pre-tax 403B contributions. So the 5, 10, 15 rule is an easy to remember and simple framework that simultaneously plans for the future, provides margin in the present, and protects your family during your earning years. Again, if you remember this and you actually implement this, you're 70 to 80% of the way there in just having your financial house in order. So let's talk about your 2 action steps as a sake of paying pastor. I promise to keep it simple. Here's 2 things that you can do this week to get you on the path. And the first is to open and fund a 403b9. Find out if your church has one. If your church does provide a retirement account, don't take for granted that it's a 403b9 plan. It could be a 401k, which probably does not have a provision compliantly to be able to pay you a housing allowance in retirement. 401k companies don't know anything about that. I don't even know if they're allowed to do it. Like it's probably not happening. Some churches do have 401ks because they don't know that a better option is available to them. So I would ask, is this specifically a 403b9 church plan? Even a generic 403b7 plan would be subject to ERISA. Your church is doing administrative tasks that it doesn't have to do by, like filing Form 5500, for instance. Your church doesn't have to do that with a 403b9 plan. It's specifically exempt from those regulations. And, why render to Caesar the things that are God's? There's the provision in the tax code that gives churches a pass and lets them have a lot more flexibility through this 403b9. Your church should have a 403b9, both to take care of you, and it also makes their life easier as well. Ask about the benefits and provisions. Say they do have a 403b9. If they don't, I'd be advocating for one. But if they do, ask about what provisions and benefits come along with that. Does your church or denomination match contributions? That would be great if they did. Do they allow in-service Roth conversions? We touched on this a little bit before, but Roth is good for pastors because your income tax bracket is artificially lowered because of your housing allowance or parsonage benefit. That means that your cost for buying tax-free growth in income is less than, comparatively similar secular employees. However, your 403b pre-tax with your church is better because you get both of it. However, you're not going to be able to take your full housing allowance in retirement, especially if you have a mortgage, because at some point you pay off that mortgage and you can only claim as much as your actual expenses. And so when you pay off your mortgage, your housing expenses go down. They don't go down to zero. You're still paying property tax and insurance and maintenance and improvements and all, repairs and cleaning and all that kind of stuff. So you'll still have some benefits, but you won't be able to just drain the account all tax-free in any given year. You do have bumpers around, and so that makes it more attractive for you to take some of your savings and convert it over to Roth. So if they have that provision, that's very attractive. So even if you like Roth, contribute pre-tax. Don't contribute as Roth. And it's important because if you contribute as Roth, you lose your SECA deduction. If you contribute pre-tax and then convert it, you only pay income tax on that conversion. And so that's a much more tax efficient way to get the same benefit long term. Leave 15 to 20% of your housing allowance contribution for the year as pre-tax. So just to keep the numbers simple, if your housing allowance is $10,000, then 1,500, or like I said, 150 or 200 of your contribution, you're going to want to leave that as pre-tax because that'll grow at about a rate that's going to make it to where you can maximize your housing allowance in retirement. Anything on top of that, if you want to convert it to Roth, go ahead. And again, none of this is investment advice. You can talk to a licensed investment professional, investment advisor, or financial planner before you implement any of this stuff. All right, your second action step is get your tax withholding right. We mentioned before that no one is withholding your self-employment taxes for you. You have to take care of that yourself. There's a couple ways to do it. The first way is by using a W-4. You can often use a W-4. You just have to fill it out in a certain way to cover your self-employment tax liability. But there is a certain situation where this won't be good enough. For example, if your housing allowance is large, 85% of your total income, for instance, then that doesn't leave enough of your income to withhold 15% for self-employment taxes. So you may have to do estimated payments too if you're in a situation where your housing allowance legitimately eats up a big chunk of your wages. The second option is through quarterly payments. These are these are the deadlines. Every self-employed or business owner knows these dates. I'm self-employed. I have these dates in my calendar as a reminder on the 10th of every month of these months to pay my quarterly estimated taxes. And so you'll just take last year's tax bill as a good rule of thumb. How much did you pay in April? Divide that by 4. That becomes your quarterly payment. And you can go to irs.gov/payments and you can make those payments directly through there. I would, if this is your situation and you prefer to take care of it yourself, or if the W-4 for whatever reason is not working for you, I'd set 4 calendar reminders right now to make sure that those get paid. And if you automatically defer 15% of every paycheck into a dedicated tax savings account, when the deadline hits, the money's already there and you don't have to worry about it. Excuse me again. All right, let's talk about filling out your W-4. This is what the W-4 looks like in 2026. You would fill it out normally. They got, instructions that show you how to do it. Maybe your HR person can help you do it as well. You'd fill it out normally, but here's what you would look for. If you scroll down to the bottom and you look at box 4C, this is extra withholding. And this is where you would put in 15% of your total paycheck and put it into this box. And this works regardless of how often you get paid. Whether you get paid monthly or you get paid bi-monthly or bi-weekly, you just take your last pay stub, look at the gross pay, include the housing allowance in there too. So it's your total wages plus housing allowance. Multiply that by 15%, put it in that 4C box. The W-4 is probably going to work for you and you won't have any big surprises in April. All right, so that's pretty simple. And if that works for you, then that's by far the easiest way to handle it. All right, so that's the SECA path that, talking about ministers that are still in the system and are paying. What are some optimization ways that you can take, that you can navigate your path toward retirement readiness? Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about pastors who have opted out of Social Security. What does your framework look like? What is your reality? And how do you navigate retirement planning? So, first thing, we're going to look at what's different between you and the sake of paying pastors. So, a lot of pastors think that they gave up the monthly check from Social Security. That's the obvious thing that you gave up, but you actually gave up 4 distinct benefits, and we're going to go over these in detail. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. You can download the slides down in the description, and you can look at this anytime. But these are the 4 things that you gave up. First, you gave up the monthly benefit, which we talked about. You replaced that with a higher savings rate. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. You've given up Social Security disability. So if you're in Social Security and you become disabled while you're working, SSDI can kick in and it can provide 60-70% of the income that you would have gotten through Social Security. You replace this with long-term disability insurance. Hopefully your church provides it. If they don't, I'd be asking them to provide it. The third is you're giving up spousal and survivor benefits. And normally, when whether if your spouse has not built up as much Social Security as you have, then your spouse can take your benefit or theirs, whichever is higher. And if you pass away, they can take your benefit if it's higher as well. And so that's a benefit that's given up if you've opted out of Social Security and you replace this with higher life insurance coverage. And then your Medicare Part A subsidy is something else you're giving up. This is huge. This is 100% subsidized for retirees who have their full 40 quarters. Right now, if you buy in yourself, it's like $525 a month, I think. If you're not eligible for Medicare and you want Part A hospital coverage, that's $525 a month just for that. 100% subsidized if you have Medicare eligibility. And so if you've opted out and you're not getting Medicare, you or your spouse, I would be leveraging an HSA, a health savings account. Again, your church needs to provide this. Then usually that reduces your self-employment taxes going in, just like a 403B would. And so, if your church can provide it, that would be amazing. If they can't, I would be talking to them about it. All right. Now your accounts work a little differently now. The 403b9 is still amazing. I would keep it. I would put it in at least 15 to 20% of your current housing allowance. I would be putting that into um, as pre-tax contributions to make sure you get income tax benefit going in, tax benefit coming out. So designations can still be tax-free in retirement, but because you're not paying self-employment taxes, you lose the SECA reduction benefit of the pre-tax contributions. So it's still good. It's just not as good compared to your counterparts on the SECA path. So this makes Roth slightly more attractive because I did say that Roth is good for pastors. It's just that the 403b9 pre-tax is better. It's just that you're not going to be able to use the full benefit in retirement if you pay off your mortgage. And so you have some more room. And if you've opted out, you can contribute directly to Roth. You don't have to do the weird conversion stuff because you're not working around the SECA tax deduction. So since the SECA tax deduction no longer applies, you can consider shifting more savings weight to Roth for growth, flexibility, and legacy. That's what makes Roth really powerful. Um, if you pass away and you still have value in your pre-tax 403b account, unless your spouse or your children are licensed ministers, they're not going to be able to take that out tax-free. They'll have to pay taxes on it as if it was a normal pre-tax account. If it's in a Roth, then they do get it tax-free and they don't have to pay taxes on it either. So Roth is good. And so if we have room to put some in Roth, then we can do that as well. Here's the general framework. Again, you want to fund your housing allowance in retirement. Math ends up being about 15 to 20% of your current allowance in pre-tax. Anything else to fill up your retirement savings target, you can do it pre-tax or you can consider Roth, whatever works for you. And of course, you should be talking with your financial planner before you implement any of this stuff. Every situation is different. So what's your framework as an opted out pastor? We had the 5-10-15 rule for SECA pastors. For you, the stakes are higher and the targets are higher. 5, 15, 25. Same framework, different numbers. So the 5 months of expenses, that hasn't changed. Your situation as far as your vulnerability to employee situations is the same as your counterparts. It doesn't make a difference whether you've opted out of Social Security or not. However, life insurance, you want 15 times annual income rather than 10. And again, that's because you've lost the spousal and survivor benefits. The 15x helps protect your family in that case. The extra 5x, so we said 10x in term life insurance. 15x, you can do term, but there is some room in that extra 5x if you have the cash flow to maybe consider some permanent life insurance. Whole life is kind of antiquated. Nowadays, they have things like indexed universal life, which tends to be cheaper and tends to be a little bit more flexible. So I would talk to your insurance broker about whether that works. It's still more expensive than term, but it does have the benefit of actually replacing survivor benefits because it lasts past your working years and it lasts for your entire life. And so if you're really looking and really serious about replacing the survivor benefits for Social Security, then you might carve off some of that 15x of your income and put some of that into a permanent life insurance policy. Again, it's going to be more expensive. It's not for everybody, but it's worth thinking about and talking to your insurance broker about. And then the 25 is for a 25% savings rate, up from a 15% in the opted out or in the opted in path. And it may sound aggressive, 25% of your total income saving for retirement, but I've run the math. This is basically what it requires. This is assuming that you have nothing coming to you from Social Security, you have nothing coming to you from Medicare, your spouse also has nothing coming to them. This is just what it takes. This is what it takes to build your own safety net. And so I'd like to say that this is aspirational. This is kind of the floor. If you're opted out, you need to be saving 25% of your paycheck for a retirement or for health savings in retirement. All right, let's talk about your 2 action steps today as an opted out minister. First thing is to just check your Social Security eligibility. This is an important thing to get into your head. Opting out, if you've opted out of Social Security, you've only opted out from ministerial income. It does not affect income from other work. So what that means is that if you have ever worked in the private sector, if you've ever had non-ministry jobs, maybe before you did ministry, maybe you're bivocational, maybe you're self-employed and you have side gigs like Uber or Lyft or something like that, you're paying into Social Security with those jobs and with that job history. So you or your spouse may be closer to benefits than you think. So the target is 40 quarters of total work. That gives you full eligibility for those four benefits that we talked about under the Social Security umbrella. That's 10 years of non-ministry work, and you can earn the full Medicare subsidy. You can earn the spousal benefits, the SSDI, the monthly check, all of that. Some of those benefits will be reduced, of course, but by far the most cost-effective way to replace those benefits is to see if you can earn your way through non-ministry work to getting those 40 quarters. So you can go check your record right now. You can go to ssa.gov. It takes a few minutes, assuming you already have. Yep, they go through ID.me, so it may take a while to verify your identity the first time. But after that, you can see your credits, you can track, how much you've paid in, you can look at your projected benefit, you can check your spouse's record, all that kind of stuff, totally free. If you have a Social Security number, even if you've opted out of Social Security, you will have a record and it'll show you if you have any credits. Count towards 40 quarters if you're short. Again, if you're close, like say you have 30 credits. First of all, if you have 30 credits, then you have partial subsidy for Medicare Part A, so you don't have to pay the full 500 if you want to buy in, which is great. But if you can, with 2.5 years of side work or what have you, if you can earn full eligibility for all of those benefits, that's going to be worth it. So I would talk with your financial planner and get a plan to get covered if you're not. And then finally, factor in your spouse. Is your spouse close to 40 quarters? Can your spouse help provide some of that coverage for the household, because you still have spousal benefits through your spouse, perhaps if they have eligibility and you do not. So don't assume the worst just because you've opted out. You have nothing coming to you from Social Security. It may be easier than you think to at least get something and to get some of that safety net taken care of. Action step number 2, begin replacing what opting out removed. And we went through this kind of quickly. We'll spend a little bit more time on each of these. So to replace SSDI, the Social Security Disability Insurance, this is when in your working years, if you become disabled, you can tap into your Social Security benefits early. You replace this with what's called long-term disability insurance. You're going to want to talk to your insurance broker about getting this set up. You're going to want to talk to your church about providing this as an employer benefit in a group plan. It's going to typically be more cost effective to do it that way. And I feel like that's a good idea for your church to provide to you. You want it to be 60 to 70% of your income, and you want to make sure own occupation is in the coverage definition. You want to be able, some of them are more restrictive, being like any occupation, where it's like, well, you can do something, so we're not going to pay you. No, if you're disabled to where you cannot do your current profession, you want that to be covered and you want that to trigger benefits. So this is, and you want to verify your ministerial income is covered in the earnings definition. Sometimes they don't cover like housing allowance, right? So that's a bad surprise. It's like, oh yeah, I'm covering 60 or 70% of my wages, but you're only taking like $20,000 in wages a year and the rest is housing allowance. That's a bad surprise. So really make sure you're working with a company that understands ministers and ask them explicitly, is my housing allowance included in earnings for disability insurance purposes? And if the answer is no, find somebody else. Your monthly benefit, this is the check that comes to you. This is where the 25% enhanced savings rate gets you. It gets you a bigger nest egg that allows you to replace the Social Security benefits. You combine this with your 403(b)(9) housing allowance optimization, and you do it in a very tax efficient way, which is very nice. The survivor benefit you give up, this is what the life insurance, the enhanced life insurance coverage purchases for you. Again, we're talking term life insurance. For the bulk of it, you have some room for some permanent life insurance to supplement your term insurance within that 15x. If it works for you, again, that's going to be more expensive, but it is going to cover you for your whole life, at least a portion of that. So it might be worth thinking about. Size for a spouse who may outlive you by 30 years. For those of us guys, we're typically going to be outlived by our spouses. It's good to take care of them. Revisit it every 5 years as things change with your income, cost of living, etc. And then finally, you replace your Medicare benefit with HSA savings strategy. Again, HSA stands for Health Savings Account. This is an account that your church can open for you or that you can open up yourself. If you can get your church to do it, that's better because, again, that typically is exempt from self-employment tax. You very much want to have that benefit. So it goes in pre-tax just like the 403b, and you can take it out tax-free for medical expenses just like the 403b. So it's like having a little mini 403b9 just for medical expenses. Very powerful if you set it up through your church. And I would be talking to your church about setting that up. But if you've opted out of Social Security, you're going to want to be replacing your Medicare eligibility, and you're going to want to be maxing out that HSA every year and not paying it. You can pay it for current medical expenses. I would hold off on it as much as you can. I would make sure to open up the HSA with a company that allows you to invest that money. I know that Fidelity, provides one. I know there's other providers that do as well, but you don't just want to set it up with a bank where it's just going to sit there in savings for their 40-year career. You want that to be cooking. You want that to be invested in something that's going to grow because this is like a supplemental retirement plan, right? Anyway, so that's what we're talking about there. These are the ways that you can start working towards replacing those benefits that you've opted out of. All right, as promised, we have some bonus content here for pastors that are in a parsonage. One of the blind spots that apply to these pastors is that you're not building equity in real estate as you're working. And so, and of course, your parsonage benefit does not outlive your ministry career. Like you retire from ministry, your church has provided you a parsonage. They're no longer providing you that parsonage. You now have to go find a house with what? With what money? Like if you're a cash housing allowance pastor, you've been building up home equity, and you may even have a paid off house at this point, which would be great. You're going to have to replace that. So let's fix that. Let's give you a really easy framework to replace this benefit. And the earlier you start, the better. So again, here's the parsonage problem. So you have pastors with cash housing allowances and mortgages, and then you have pastors with a parsonage benefit that's provided by the church. Pastor with a mortgage, they pay their monthly mortgage. They're building equity with every payment. Their house is appreciating over time. They're realizing all of that appreciation. They retired with potentially a paid off asset, or they could sell it, pocket some money, and then downsize. Their housing is essentially solved at retirement, right? So often they'll have a paid off home, or they're close to having it paid off, and it's a great situation for them. The parsonage pastor, on the other hand, you pay no one housing costs now, which is a real benefit right now, but you're building zero equity. You're not paying a mortgage. Your home, you're missing out on home appreciation. You potentially reach retirement with no real equity to show for it, and you must find a way to fund a retirement home, a place to live from scratch. So how do we fix that? I call it the phantom mortgage. I'm real proud of this. This is I've run the math and I've made it really easy. You invest what you would have paid in a mortgage, and actually less than that. I'll show you why in a minute. And you're building an asset instead of in home equity. You're building it in stocks and other funds, and you end up at basically the same spot that you would if you were paying a part. If you were a cash housing allowance who owned a home, you end up with basically the same equity with usually less than half of the total investment, which I think is really cool. So this is what we've come together. Here's the formula. So you can do this today. You can sit down with your spouse, find a home that's like a dream retirement home. This will be a fun date night, activity. This is from free advice for you. Go to Zillow or Redfin or whatever and look at the houses that are for sale and find one. Oh, that would be a cute one we could retire in together. A little 2 or 3 bedroom, like the kids can come visit us. We have a nice big yard, whatever. And okay, you found your house. You're like, you're not going to buy the house right now, of course, but we're just dreaming at this point. You look at the price of that house, the asking price. You're going to drop 3 zeros off of it, and you're going to take the difference and you're going to double that to get you your phantom mortgage number. So for instance, if your home that you're looking at is $400,000, you're going to drop 3 zeros to get $400. You're going to double that to get $800, right? So if your dream retirement home is $400,000, then your phantom mortgage is $800 a month. Good luck finding a mortgage payment for $800 a month for a $400,000 home. This is the power of compound interest in equities, like in stocks or in low cost index funds or whatever you and your investment advisor are putting together. Um, Stocks tend to appreciate faster than real estate. And so that means that you can end up at sort of, basically at the same finish line as a homeowning pastor with less overall investment because the underlying investment is working harder for you in the meantime. And the math works out beautifully. So if you invest this amount monthly every month into low cost index funds, this becomes your phantom mortgage payment. And the way this works is if you treat this as if it was a mortgage, bring the same level of discipline to paying yourself this money as you would as if you were paying a mortgage. And your future self will thank you for it. So where do you put it? Right? So, you're putting $800 a month. What do you invest that in? I like starting with a Roth IRA. And I know I kind of said, in putting into a Roth or contributing to a Roth as an opted in pastor is not necessarily ideal because you're not leveraging the tax benefits of the SECA deduction, by comparing to a 403b with your church. However, for this purpose in particular, I feel like this wins, and I think it has a lot of provisions that make it work really well. First of all, withdrawals are tax free in retirement. So, and there's no limit to how much you take out at a time. So say you've put into your phantom mortgage over 30 years, you have over $1 million. You could take that whole $1 million out and just buy a home with cash, essentially, no mortgage at all. And you don't pay taxes on any of that coming out, which is great, because if you had built that up in a pre-tax account or in a brokerage account, if you realize all that in 1 year, all of a sudden your income spikes for that year, you end up taking a big chunk in taxes. You're building up specifically to be able to pull it out all at once and put it down on a home. So you want to put it in a tax efficient engine like a Roth IRA. The reason why I like a Roth IRA in particular and not necessarily like a Roth 403b is that your contributions from a Roth IRA in particular can be withdrawn anytime. Now, I'm not saying you can withdraw everything. It's still considered a retirement account, and you'll take penalties if you withdraw it before 59 and a half. But the money you put in, if that money is still there, you can take it out for free, no questions asked, no penalties, no taxes. That's just how a Roth IRA works. So if you're putting in, say, $6,000 a year for 10 years, you've put $60,000 total into that account, right? Hopefully that account is worth more than $60,000 because of all the growth that's been happening in that time. So say it's doubled, say it's worth $120,000 of that 60,000 you put in. You can take that $60,000 out at any time. And again, you leave the growth in. You're not allowed to touch that. But you can take out the money you put in and you can put that on a down payment on a house. Say you end up having to buy a house earlier than anticipated. You're in a parsonage situation, your calling changes, you take a job at a church that does not provide a parsonage, and now you're on the hook to buy a home. Well, in that scenario, you have $60,000 sitting in a Roth account that you can pull out tax-free, penalty-free, put it on a down payment on a house, and now you've caught up with your your cash housing allowance pastors colleagues. So it's a good situation. I feel like the flexibility of the Roth paired with the tax-free nature of it makes this the premier engine for your phantom mortgage. The bad news is that they don't let you put much into a Roth IRA, probably because it's such a great benefit. They don't want you to abuse the system. They only let you put in $7,500 a year in 2026, $8,600 if you're 50 plus. And if you're, again, if your phantom mortgage is $800 a month, like it is in this example, you're going to max out your Roth IRA quickly, and you're going to have some extra to put somewhere. So what do you do with the rest? You just put that in a taxable brokerage account. And again, you can talk to your financial advisor. None of this is investment advice. You're going to want to talk to your licensed professionals to talk about what you invest in, how you invest it. This is all just educational. But if you put it into a taxable brokerage account, you can put it in the same funds that you put it in the Roth account in. There's no contribution limit. You can withdraw it at any time. And if you keep it in there at least a year, it's taxed at long-term capital gains rates when you take it out rather than income tax rates, which tend to be more favorable. So at the end, you may pay a little bit in capital gains taxes when you pull it out, but the bulk of it's going to be tax-free in that Roth account. And then you can go and hopefully go pay cash for a house. That would be really nice. So that's the mortgage. That's the phantom mortgage. Find your deal, find your dream home, drop off 3 zeros, double it, invest that much per month. max out a Roth first, put the rest into a brokerage account. You heard it here first for our parsonage pastors out there that want to build some equity. All right, decision framework. This is for those pastors that are early in their career and are looking for um, some guidance. Should I opt out? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Let's talk about it. All right, first of all, are you even eligible? All right, and by the way, this is a great information, even if you have opted out or the window is passed for you, you're established in your ministry, you're going to be mentoring young pastors all the time that are going to be coming into the calling and will be asking this exact question. And so this is kind of equipping you as well for being able to mentor these young people who are just starting in their ministry and give them some good wisdom. So the first step, are you even eligible to do it? All of these 5 things must be true. You must be an ordained, licensed, or commissioned minister by your faith tradition. You must be receiving actual compensation for ministerial duties. So this window does not open. If you're a volunteer minister, this window does not open until you start taking vocational money for ministry. You must have not previously filed a Form 4361. This is the form, if you're opting out of Social Security, that's the form you sign. It's Form 4361. You can go look it up. I recommend that you do, because there's language in there. There's like a whole 3 or 4 paragraphs that you have to attest to, and we'll talk about some of that. But anyway, if you filed that form before, at any point, you can't go back on it. That's an irrevocable decision. So if at any time you've done that and you're getting cold feet and you want to opt back in, that typically does not happen. There have been times in history where Congress has opened up that window temporarily, at certain times in history that's happened, but we don't count on that happening in the future. All right, are you within approximately 2 years ordination or your first ministerial income? Again, that's a 2-year window that starts when you start taking money. If you're within that window, then maybe you're eligible to opt out. And this is the most important one. Do you hold a genuine religious or conscientious objection to accepting public insurance? Because that's what you're attesting to when you sign this form. This is a religious decision. This is not a math decision. This is not a practical decision. This is not a political decision. This is not a pragmatic decision. None of that enters into it. This is fundamentally, do you believe in your heart of hearts that this is what the Lord is requiring of you, to conscientiously object to accepting public insurance? That's the issue that we're dealing with here. So let's go through the 4 questions. And again, if you can answer yes, and only if you can answer yes to all 4 of these questions, would I even consider that opting out may be right for you. But here are the questions. The first one is, do you understand what you're agreeing to? Again, from Form 4361, I certify that I am conscientiously opposed to, or because of my religious principles, I am opposed to, the acceptance of any public insurance. And it goes on a little bit more. There's more on the form. I want you to read it all. But these reasons do not qualify. You have to be able to say, yes, I believe I am conscientiously opposed to these things for religious reasons. I can invest the money better myself is not a valid reason to sign this form. My denomination encourages it. That is also not a valid reason. This is a personal decision, and peer pressure is not a valid reason to opt out. I need the extra money right now. And let's be real, this is probably, if I were to guess, this is the biggest reason that drives young ministers to make this decision. Because no one told them in seminary that they were going to be self-employed. No one told them that they would have to pay 15 cents on the dollar for everything that they make, including their housing allowance. And so they do their first year of ministry and they go to do their taxes. And what do you mean I owe, $4,000, $5,000 in self-employment taxes? What does that mean? Where does that come from? But if you sign this magical piece of paper, all of this goes away. I think that's happening a lot, and it's a travesty, honestly. I think we should be training our young ministers early on this stuff so that they're not blindsided. On top of all the sacrifices they take just to get into ministry, they have this sacrifice on top of it of having an unfair tax situation. They should at least be educated going in. But regardless, this is not a good reason to make this election. And I don't trust Social Security to be there when I retire. There was a big push back in the 1990s where ministers were opting out of Social Security, and a lot of them were using this. I don't even think Social Security is going to be around. Well, it's still around. Those ministers are getting into their early 70s, mid 70s, late 70s. and they did not save for themselves. They're facing retirement poverty, and it's a bad situation. So this is not a good reason to opt out. Second question, do you know what you're giving up? Again, we talked about the four things that you're giving up. I'll put them here quickly. It's good to go over it again, but we've gone over this in detail. You're giving up the monthly benefit, yes, but you're also giving up SSDI, you're giving up Medicare Part A subsidies, and you're giving up spousal and survivor benefits. The third question is, do you know what it takes to replace all four of those things? You're going to need long-term care, long-term disability insurance, excuse me, to replace the SSDI. You're going to need more life insurance to cover the spousal survivor benefits, and you're going to need to max out your HSA to cover Medicare eligibility. You're also going to need 40 years of ironclad discipline to stick to this plan, even when the kid gets sick, even when the car breaks down, even when a tree falls on the house. There's no tightening the belt when things get tough. In order for this to work out, you just got to stick to it. And to be real, only about 5% of people stick to a savings plan with that level of discipline that's required to really cover it. So ask yourself the honest question, am I in that 5% where I can stick to this plan and really stick to it and replace those benefits? And then the fourth question is perhaps the most important. Is this what God's calling you to do? This is a harder path. This is not an easier path. It may be expedient because you're kicking the can down the road. You're not paying self-employment tax today, but this ultimately ends up being a harder path. You're having to recreate an entire social safety net entirely on your own. So asking yourself these questions would be good before the Lord. Am I making this choice from faith, or am I making it from fear? Fear of the future or fear of the present? Am I seeking God's direction, or am I seeking financial advantage? What happens to my family if this plan doesn't work? What if I don't save as much? What if the market doesn't grow as much as I think, et cetera, et cetera? Proverbs 16:9 says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. And so I want to leave you with that as we consider this question here. So really quick, that's the end of the presentation here. You can download the slides below. I also have a downloadable link there to the full playbook. And it's a one-pager for each of the paths that you could be on, where it kind of breaks down all of this into a cheat sheet, if you will, to kind of show you your next steps and to show you the big pictures of what we're talking about. Feel welcome to avail yourself of that. Come back and watch this video. It's the same link. It'll be here in perpetuity. You can come back and watch this anytime. If you want to work with me, I do a pastor tax review. This is my entry-level thing that I do. And tax season just ended, but it's not too late to get a second opinion on what you did. If you're not 100% confident in you or your tax preparer's ability to compliantly do your return, I'll take a look at it, and I'm giving you a discount. If you put in tax piece 26, you can get 26% off, and it's actually 160. It's 150 after a $10 discount that I give to people, but starting at 160, 26% off is around 118 bucks. I'm looking for compliance issues, but I'm also looking for long-range opportunities that you could be taking advantage in your particular situation. I got it pretty dialed in. It's one of my favorite things that I do. And I'm also throwing in a church infrastructure review, and this is for free. I'm happy to have a 20-minute call with your church treasurer or admin to essentially advocate on your behalf. I'll be asking them questions. Are you providing a 403b9 plan? Are you providing long-term disability insurance as an employer benefit group plan? Are you providing HSAs? Are you providing a Social Security offset? Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you should be in an unfair situation where you're on the hook to cover both sides of Social Security. A lot of churches are voluntarily adding 7.65% to your pay to offset that. And I'm going to ask your church, are they doing that? I think they should be. So if you want to get me in touch with your church administrator or treasurer, I'm happy to talk to them for free, advocate on your behalf. If you're a denominational leader and you're watching this is exactly the caliber of education and the kind of targeted content that I provide to your ministers at no individual cost to themselves. I love working with denominations to provide this sort of training and content at scale throughout your entire pastoral network. So I'd love to talk to you about that. All right. Let's go to the questions. I saw some coming in. Greg, good to see you. Thank you again for your patience. Is there a difference in a 403b and a 403b9? Yes, there is. A 403b7 is a traditional 403b, and that is subject to ERISA. That's the oversight, act of Congress that oversees employer-sponsored retirement plans. So 403b7s are worse for churches because one, they're inefficient for the church. Because 403b7s are subject to ERISA, they have all of these regulations they have to jump through. They have to fill out a 5500 form every year, which is a big pain in the neck. Churches are specifically exempt from ERISA, by the way. And so that's why the IRS carved out a 403b9 specifically just for them. The other problem with 403b7s is that they're typically put out by companies that don't understand churches. Like this, just I won't name any, but just like the big investment companies, their bread and butter are ERISA plans, and so that's what they're covering. And so the whole thing where it's like, well, can they be taken as a housing allowance? And they'll probably look at you funny and be like, "What are you talking about? We don't do that." So having a 403b9 is really the way to go, especially if you're a church. It makes things easier on the church, and it's going to be easier for you because you're definitely going to get the tax benefits that are coming to you, and there's no question about it. Anyway, so that's the only question that I saw there. Really great to see you all. Thank you for being a part of this. Those that are watching later, you can download the slides down there, and God bless you. Have a good one.